I was at the kitchen table when the phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was just one of those little notifications from the grocery store or maybe a reminder about an unpaid bill. I almost didn't look. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums around you when you've lived alone long enough. My reading glasses were perched low on my nose, and I was just finishing labeling the last of the tiny souvenir bags for the children. The bags were bright, with ribbons that curled in spirals. Inside each one I had slipped a keychain shaped like a seashell and a small note written by hand, "Grandma loves you." I had tied each ribbon tightly, double knots, so they wouldn't fall apart during the trip that was supposed to be mine too. I reached for the phone and swiped it open. The message was short. "Cold, you won't be joining us. Sophia prefers it to be only her family." I froze. I blinked once, twice, as if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read it again. And again. Each time the words looked the same. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder, almost menacing. I placed the phone flat on the table and pulled it back toward me. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe David hadn't meant it the way it sounded, but the words didn't change. They were heavy, blunt, unshakable. Another buzz, another message. "Don't take it the wrong way, Mom. It's not personal, it's just simpler this way. Simpler." That word lodged itself inside me like a thorn. Simpler to erase me. Simpler to pretend the money I had scraped together for 3 years was nothing but a ticket to silence me. I sat there staring at the phone. The clock on the wall ticked forward, steady, cruel. The house felt too big around me, too empty. My eyes drifted to the suitcase waiting by the door. I had packed it days ago. 2 sundresses folded neatly, sandals tucked into the corner, a lavender candle wrapped in soft cloth, and a framed photograph of James, my late husband. I had planned to set that candle on the table by the beach, to tell my grandchildren the story of how their grandfather loved the ocean, how he carried me on his back across the sand when we were young and broke and laughed at things that would later seem too small to laugh about. But apparently none of that mattered now. The shame hit first. Not anger, not sadness, but shame. The kind of shame that makes you feel foolish for ever hoping. I had imagined us standing together on the shore, barefoot, with the waves curling against our feet. I had imagined lighting the candle in James's memory, watching the children's eyes glow in the firelight. I had imagined them asking me questions, touching my hand, saying, "Tell us more about him, Grandma," but I had imagined it all wrong. I reached out and untied one of the souvenir bags. The ribbon fell limp against my fingers. I pulled out the tiny seashell keychain, felt the ridges beneath my thumb, and placed it on the table. One bag undone, then another, then another. The counter slowly filled with trinkets meant for children who would never hold them. The house seemed to sigh with me. I thought about answering. I thought about typing back, "David, please, this hurts," but my hands wouldn't move. Because if he didn't already know, if he didn't already feel it in his own chest, then nothing I wrote would change him. I set the phone face down. The screen went black. The clock ticked closer to midnight. The light above the sink flickered faintly, buzzing against the silence. I could hear the faint creak of the wood beneath the refrigerator. Small sounds in a house that had held too many small sounds for too long. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, and for a moment I thought I heard James's voice. Not words, just the memory of his laugh. He had laughed so easily, so loudly, the kind of laugh that made strangers smile. I closed my eyes and let it echo in me, a sound that made the silence hurt even more. I whispered to myself, though the walls didn't answer. "When did I become a burden in the family I built?" The words cracked in my throat. I hadn't meant to say them out loud, but once they were spoken, they lingered. They hung in the air, heavy, like dust that refused to settle. I stood and walked to the suitcase. My hands hovered over the zipper. Part of me wanted to unpack it, to fold the dresses back into drawers, to hide the candle in the closet, to put James's photo back on the shelf where it had stood for years. But I couldn't. I couldn't admit defeat yet, not even to myself. So I left the suitcase where it was, a monument to hope that had already been buried. The phone stayed face down. No more messages came. The night stretched out long and unforgiving. I stayed at the table until dawn began to edge through the curtains, painting the room in pale light. My eyes burned, but I hadn't cried. Not yet. The tears would come later, I knew. For now, there was only silence and the weight of a truth I hadn't wanted to face. They didn't want me, not on the trip, not in the photo, not even in the story. And the worst part was I had paid for all of it. Morning came without sleep. The first rays of light slipped through the blinds and landed across the kitchen table, illuminating the mess I had left there. Keychains scattered like seashells on sand, ribbons curled in loose spirals, my phone still face down as if I could hide from what it held. I stood slowly, my joints stiff, my body heavy with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of rest but from carrying disappointment too long. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited for the whistle. My hands shook as I reached for a mug, the chipped one James had bought at a roadside diner on our way to Yellowstone decades ago. He had teased the waitress until she let him take it home for $1. I had held on to it all these years. I poured the tea, but I didn't drink. I only held the mug close, letting the steam fog my glasses, letting the warmth fight the chill that had settled in my chest. I should have been packing snacks for the children's flight, checking boarding passes, double-checking car reservations. Instead, I stood barefoot in my kitchen staring at a mug that belonged to a world long gone. The phone buzzed once, a small vibration against the wood. I didn't move. It buzzed again, and still I didn't reach for it. I couldn't bear to see another line of text that sliced me out of my own family. I walked to the living room instead. The walls were lined with photographs. Some in frames, some in albums stacked neatly on the shelves. Holidays, birthdays, graduations. And yet, as I studied them, I noticed how few of them showed me. Over the years, I had become the one behind the camera, or worse, the one never asked to join. There was one photo, though, that stopped me. James holding David on his shoulders at the beach. The boy's arms outstretched like he could touch the sky, his laughter caught in midair. James's eyes squinting against the sun, but his smile wide and sure. I remembered the moment, the way the sand burned under our feet, the way James lifted him high and said, "Remember this, son. Remember how it feels to be held this way." I wondered if David remembered. The kettle clicked off behind me. The tea had already cooled in my cup, untouched. I set it aside and went to the small desk in the den. My laptop sat there, dusty from disuse. I opened it, and the screen blinked awake slowly, as if even it hesitated to face the day. There was a folder labeled Hawaii Fund. I clicked it open. My stomach twisted as numbers filled the screen. Every reservation, every ticket, every careful line item I had saved for. 3 years of sacrifice, of small denials, of nights working with tired eyes and aching joints. Over $21,000. Every cent mine. Every cent pulled from the pockets of my quiet, ordinary life. And now I was not even invited. I stared at the cursor blinking in the corner. One option sat before me, quiet but certain: freeze account. I hovered over the button, my finger trembling just above the trackpad. One click would undo it all. One click would halt the flights, the villa, the tour. One click would bring everything crashing down. I pulled my hand back, heart racing. Not yet. I wasn't ready, not tonight. The thought frightened me as much as it thrilled me. For the first time, I realized the power was mine. They had treated me like a wallet, but the wallet had a lock. I closed the laptop gently and leaned back in the chair. My breath came slow, deliberate. I looked at the shelves around me, the souvenirs from a life of trying to hold everything together. I thought about James, about how he used to tell me I was stronger than I believed. I thought about the boy who once called me his best friend, who drew me in crayon with a cape. Where had that boy gone? The phone buzzed again. I finally picked it up, my thumb hesitating before unlocking the screen. It was not David this time, but Sophia. "Hi, Marilyn, I just wanted to check in. Everything settled with the payments, right? We wouldn't want any last-minute hiccups. Let me know if you need us to cover anything, but I think you've got it all handled." Her tone was sweet, but beneath it was steel. It wasn't a question. It was a reminder of the role they had written for me. Pay, smile, disappear. I put the phone down slowly. My pulse thudded in my ears. I stood and walked to the closet. From the top shelf, I pulled down a small fireproof box. Inside were papers, receipts, contracts. My name was on every page. Account holder, Vanessa Barker. Authorized users, none. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the proof of my own sacrifice. Every paper said the same thing. It was mine, all of it. Mine. For a long time, I didn't move. The house was still, the world outside just beginning to wake. My eyes burned again, not with tears this time, but with clarity. I whispered into the empty air, the words trembling but real. They forgot who raised them. The sentence hung in the air like a vow. I gathered the papers back into the box, set it on the shelf, and stood. The suitcase was still by the door, waiting. I walked over, touched the handle, and let my fingers rest there. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. I left the suitcase standing and turned back toward the kitchen. The mug of tea was cold, the ribbons scattered, the candle still waiting to be lit. I carried the mug to the sink and poured it out. Then I sat again at the table, the phone between my hands, and stared into the silence. I had no plan yet, no answers, just the beginning of a truth that scared me and steadied me at once. They thought I was powerless, but they had forgotten something important. The account was mine. The night after that message stretched out longer than any I could remember. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, the words replayed in the dark, glowing as if they had been burned into the inside of my eyelids. You won't be joining us. Sophia prefers it to be only her family. I turned from one side to the other, my sheets twisting around me. The house was silent, but inside me there was a storm. My body wanted rest, but my mind kept digging, replaying, unraveling. I thought of David's voice when he was young, the way he once whispered good night at my bedroom door after nightmares. I thought of how he used to hold my hand crossing the street, how he cried when James died, how he said he didn't know how to live without a father. Back then, he clung to me like I was the only rope holding him steady. Now, I was just the wallet he had learned to unplug. I gave up on sleep. I slipped out of bed and walked down the hall barefoot. The carpet muffled my steps, but the boards beneath groaned faintly, old wood that remembered every footstep. I reached the kitchen and turned on the small under-cabinet light. The glow was soft, pale yellow, casting long shadows across the counters. The suitcase was still by the door. I stood staring at it for a long moment, arms crossed against my chest, the silence wrapping around me. It looked foolish now, a mockery of my hope. A suitcase full of clothes and memories for a trip I was never meant to take. I went to the counter and picked up one of the undone souvenir bags. I held it in my hand like it was a living thing, fragile, breakable. I had written each child's name carefully in marker. Olivia, Ethan, Grace. Letters traced with a kind of devotion that felt invisible now. They would never even see them. They would never open these little bags that had carried so much of my love. I set the bag down and pressed my palms against the counter, breathing slow, trying to hold back the trembling. The laptop waited on the desk in the den. I sat down, opened it again, and the same numbers glowed at me. Every detail of the trip was recorded here. The villa by the beach, the airline tickets, the snorkeling lessons, the rental car, even the lays they were supposed to receive at the airport when they landed. I had planned every detail, built every brick of this dream with my bare hands. For what? I leaned back and closed my eyes. I remembered the jar I once kept in the cupboard, the dream jar. It started with small bills, $10, $20 slipped inside whenever I denied myself something I wanted. No new shoes, no dinner out, no movie tickets. Over time, the jar grew until I opened a special account. I thought I was building a bridge to my family, a way back into their hearts. But now it looked more like I had built a pedestal for them to stand on while I disappeared beneath. The cursor blinked at me. The freeze button still sat there, quiet, patient. Just one click and everything would fall apart. I almost did it. My finger hovered, but I pulled back again, heart pounding. I wasn't ready to be that woman, not yet. Instead, I opened a blank document. My hands trembled as I typed a single word, list. Under it, I wrote names, not my family's names, others. Women from church, neighbors, old friends. Claire, who hadn't left the state in 20 years. Margaret, who still wore her wedding ring though her husband had been gone 10 years. Nora, who helped raise her grandchildren but was left out of their graduations. Evelyn, who once told me she had never seen the ocean. The names appeared one after another, each one carrying the weight of stories I already knew. Women who gave everything and were given nothing back. Women who knew what it felt like to be invisible. I sat back and stared at the list. My chest ached, but in a different way. Not pain exactly, but recognition. I wasn't the only one. The thought steadied me. Still, the night stretched on. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of tea. This time I drank it slowly, the steam curling against my face, the warmth sliding down my throat. I looked out the window at the backyard, at the birdbath James had installed years ago. The water shimmered faintly under the moonlight. I whispered his name, almost afraid to hear it out loud. James. The air shifted as if he might answer, but there was only silence. I closed my eyes and remembered our honeymoon. Hawaii. We were 24, barely married, broke but fearless. We shared one suitcase, split sandwiches at lunchtime, laughed until our stomachs hurt when James burned so badly he had to drape himself in a bedsheet for the rest of the week. We had nothing, and yet it felt like we had everything. That was the dream I had been chasing. To give my family one last glimpse of that kind of happiness, that kind of togetherness. But the truth hit harder now. They didn't want it, not from me. They wanted the money, not the memory. I opened my eyes. The tea was gone, the mug empty. I placed it in the sink and stood there in the dark kitchen, hands braced on the counter, breath steady. The phone buzzed again on the table. I picked it up. This time it was just David. Thanks again, Mom. We really appreciate everything you've done. We'll make sure the kids have the best time. Don't worry about us. You just focus on resting. No invitation, no apology, just dismissal packaged as gratitude. I didn't answer. I set the phone down slowly and whispered into the quiet, "I'm not done yet." The words surprised me, but they were true. I stayed awake as the hours crawled forward, each one slower than the last. The house around me was dark, but my mind refused to dim. I moved from room to room as if walking through memories, touching objects that had long since become anchors to a life that felt distant. The living room held the scent of old wood and faint lavender from the candle I had lit days ago. On the mantel sat the photo of James in his fishing hat, smiling at a catch that was far too small for the pride on his face. I ran my fingers over the frame. His absence filled the room more than his presence ever had. It struck me how often love works that way, most powerful when it is no longer there. I sat on the couch and pulled one of the photo albums onto my lap. The leather cover creaked as I opened it. Page after page of birthdays, holidays, graduations, I studied the faces, smiles wide, eyes sparkling. Yet I noticed what I had ignored for years, how often I was missing from the pictures. Sometimes because I was holding the camera, sometimes because no one thought to ask me in, sometimes because they had simply moved on without me. I lingered on a Christmas photo. Everyone in matching sweaters, red with white trees. Everyone except me. My sweater was blue. No one had told me about the plan. David had brushed it off at the time, saying, "You don't care about that stuff anyway, Mom." But I did. I had always cared. I just wasn't asked. The weight of that realization pressed on me. I flipped the pages faster now, as though confirmation of my invisibility lay on every page. And it did. I closed the album and pressed it against my chest, eyes stinging. I whispered into the silence, was I really so easy to forget? The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed softly. 3 o'clock. The world outside was deep in sleep. I rose, restless, and returned to the den. The laptop still glowed faintly, the screensaver shifting slowly from image to image. I touched the trackpad and the trip details returned. Flights, check-in times, excursions, every detail of the journey I had planned down to the minute. My name at the top of every receipt, every payment confirmation. I scrolled slowly, my hand steady now, no longer shaking. I clicked back to the blank document where I had written the word list. Names glowed at me. Claire, Margaret, Nora, Evelyn. I stared at them for a long while. I could see their faces, hear their voices. The sighs they carried when they thought no one listened. The quiet laughter that was more relief than joy. Something inside me shifted. Maybe this dream was never meant to belong to those who erased me. Maybe it belonged to people who would actually see me, sit with me, hold my hand without expecting anything in return. The thought felt dangerous and freeing all at once. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. In the darkness behind them, I pictured the trip as I had planned it. But the faces at the table were different now. Not David, not Sophia, not the children who might forget me as easily as their parents did. Instead, it was the women from my list. Women who knew what it meant to be overlooked. Women who might actually cherish the memory we could build together. I opened my eyes, my heart beat faster. For the first time in hours, maybe in years, I felt something other than shame. I wasn't powerless. I rose and walked to the window. Outside, the yard was still, the bird bath shining faintly under the moon. The wind shifted and tapped softly against the glass. I pressed my hand to the pane and whispered, "They forgot who I was, but I haven't." The words steadied me. I returned to the kitchen and poured another cup of tea. This one I drank slowly, savoring the taste. The bitterness was sharp, but it cleared my throat, cut through the heaviness in my chest. I carried the mug back to the den and sat again before the laptop. The freeze button was still there, patient, waiting. I didn't press it, not yet, but I let my finger hover longer this time, long enough to feel the power in knowing I could. When dawn finally broke, I was still awake. The sky lightened to gray, then to pale pink, casting the room in gentle color. I had not slept, but I felt more alive than I had in days. The suitcase by the door was still packed. The souvenir bag still sat on the counter. The photo of James still smiled from the mantel. But something in me had changed. I wasn't ready to strike, but I was no longer broken. The night had given me clarity. They thought they had written me out. They thought I would disappear quietly. But the long night had taught me something I would not forget. The story wasn't over. Not yet. Morning arrived the way a curtain lifts after a long performance, slow and inevitable, showing me the same stage I had left the night before. My kitchen looked unchanged, but I was not the same woman who had stared at the suitcase and swallowed the word burden like a stone. I moved quietly, almost ceremonially, washing the mug, folding a dish towel, opening the blinds to let the soft light in. It felt like telling the house we were starting over. I made oatmeal I did not want and ate half of it to remind my body I was still its keeper. Then I sat at the table with the laptop and opened it to the folder I had labeled Hawaii Fund on the day hope felt bigger than fear. The password slid from my fingers without thought. The screen filled with numbers and dates and confirmations that once meant celebration. I watched them scroll by and felt nothing. Not grief, not anger. Only assessment. As if I were balancing a ledger that finally belonged to me, I clicked into the payments dashboard. My name stood at the top like a flag planted on a quiet hill. Account owner, Vanessa Barker. Linked cards, 6. Primary billing source, same. There was a small lock icon in the corner of the screen. I had looked at it before, the way you glance at a fire extinguisher and think, good to know, but never me. This time I enlarged it. The help text appeared in a neat box. Activate lock to pause all outgoing charges. Linked cards will be disabled. Manual owner authorization required to resume. My heart did not race. It lowered itself into a steady beat like a drummer finding time. I rested my fingertips on the trackpad and let the cursor hover over the lock. I did not select it. Not yet. A choice is different when you know you can make it at any second. Power does not always need noise. I opened the calendar tab. Their flight information sat in my email, sent by the agency I had spoken to for hours over months. I transferred the details to a small note in the margin of the screen. Departure 10:45 in the morning, Los Angeles. Suggested arrival 2 hours early for check-in. Rental car release upon landing, villa access after 4 in the afternoon, lays waiting near the baggage claim under a wooden sign that said Aloha in a cheerful font that now felt like mockery. I traced the timeline with my finger on the desk. If I were someone else, this would be the moment for a furious message or a public announcement. The older I get, the more I trust the quiet. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet is a blade you can hide until you decide it belongs to you. I opened a new note and titled it simply Plan. I wrote 3 lines. 8:15 a.m. Verify lock engaged. Do not speak. I did not need more than that. I added one additional instruction for myself that had nothing to do with accounts or cards or agencies. Breathe. The kettle clicked behind me and I stood to pour another cup of tea. When I turned, my eyes landed on the souvenir bags. I had not put them away. I untied another ribbon, slid out another seashell keychain, set it beside the first. The pile grew. It felt less like undoing and more like gathering the pieces of a promise I refused to throw away. I would not let those little tokens become proof that I had wasted love. Love spent is not wasted. It is evidence. I carried the tea back to the den and opened the document I had created during the long night. List. The names looked steadier in daylight. Claire, Margaret, Nora, Evelyn. I added 2 more. Anita, who had spent a year driving her neighbor to dialysis without ever asking for gas money. Ruth, who brought covered dishes to every funeral and went home to an empty table. I sat with the list and imagined each face under island light. I saw hands open around a table, not to take from me, but to hold what I offered as if it mattered. My phone buzzed. I considered ignoring it, then turned the screen over. David again, just confirming the final transfer hits today. Looks like the villa has a balance due. Can you make sure it clears this morning so nothing stalls tomorrow? Thanks, Mom. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. We, the unit that has no space for me, appreciate the function I perform. I typed a reply and deleted it. I tried another and deleted that too. I put the phone face down and let the request fade back into the air like steam from the cup. The cursor blinked in the corner of the banking window. I clicked into the notifications pane and set an alert for my own number only. Status change on account, text Vanessa. I wanted to feel the vibration when I chose the lock. I wanted the confirmation to arrive like a small bell in my palm. I checked the fine print again. No penalties for a security pause. Vendor charges reverse to originating method. Airline taxes and fees refund to account holder within 2 to 5 business days. The language was as dull as it was final. Paper rules, but sometimes paper is the only spine you have to borrow while you learn to stand on your own again. I closed the laptop and stood by the window. The backyard had not moved, but I felt like the horizon had inched closer. I thought of James the way the air thinks of the ocean, even when it is miles away. I spoke to him in my head, the way you talk to someone you trust to hear you without answers. I am not trying to hurt them, I told him. I am trying to stop letting them hurt me. I went to the hallway closet and pulled down the fireproof box again. I took photographs of the key documents on my phone, not to share, but to remind myself of what was true if anyone tried to convince me I had misremembered my own life. I slid the box back into place and closed the closet door softly, like putting a sleeping animal back in its den. By mid-morning, I needed to leave the house before the walls filled up with words I would not say. I took the car keys and drove aimlessly at first, letting the neighborhood pass like a slow parade. Children in bright backpacks waited for buses. A man in a faded cap watered a lawn that already looked green enough. The world kept doing its ordinary work, which is the only way anyone survives extraordinary things. I ended up at the library. It was quiet as always, a sanctuary of soft carpet and the smell of paper. I returned 2 novels I had not finished and checked out a book of essays about forgiveness. I did not know if I would read it, but the weight of it felt right in my bag. Near the exit, I noticed the community bulletin board. A flyer hung slightly crooked near the bottom. Walking group for women who have outlived their husbands. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7. Meet at the east gate of Memorial Park. No fees, just shoes and water. I took a photo of the flyer. Not because I was ready to walk with anyone yet, because I wanted proof that there were rooms in the world where women like me did not have to apologize for breathing. Back in the car, I opened the Notes app and added 2 lines beneath the plan. Find a way to belong that does not require permission. Choose companions who do not demand erasure as the price of entry. I drove to the grocery store and bought fruit I could slice and eat from a bowl. Strawberries, pineapples, the kind James would spear with a fork and wave like garnishes before popping them into his mouth. At home, I cut them into pieces and ate them standing at the counter. The juice ran down my wrist and I licked it away without embarrassment. Some hungers are simple, some are not. The phone vibrated again. A group text lit the screen with photos that moved too quickly to catch. Matching hats, rolling suitcases. Sophia's parents smiling beside the airline logo as if it were a wedding arch. The caption sat under one image like a tidy verdict. Off to paradise. Family only. I did not look away. I took it in the way you let a wave hit your knees to learn how strong the current is. The sting lasted a moment, then drifted out like foam. I returned to the desk and opened the laptop. I set a small timer for 8:15 a.m. the next morning and labeled it with a single word: lock. The timer icon turned blue. I tested the alert sound and lowered the volume to a soft chime. The house need not be startled to know I was awake. I laid out the papers I might need. Account numbers, agency contact, reservation codes. I stacked them in crisp order, not because I expected a fight, but because a clear desk calms the part of me that believes chaos must be endured. Order is a kindness you can give yourself for free. I called the travel agency and asked a simple question. Could the account owner change the names on an existing villa reservation if a cancellation became necessary? The woman on the phone answered with professional sweetness. If the booking was refunded to the originating method, the owner could rebook in any configuration available for the dates, provided the calendar allowed. There might be a short gap before funds fully settled. She paused and added that she hoped everything was all right. Everything is becoming all right, I said, and surprised myself with the honesty of it. After lunch, I took a short walk. The sun sat high and generous. A neighbor waved from her porch and asked if I was excited for spring. I told her yes, and meant it for reasons she did not need to know. When I returned, I printed the list of names and tucked it into the back of my recipe book where I had kept James's favorite marinade and the notes from the year I tried to bake bread and burned the first 6 loaves. Both are records of trying. Trying is what humans do between the blows. The afternoon moved with a patient rhythm. I did small chores, folded laundry, wiped down the bathroom sink. With each task completed, the house felt less like a room where I had been sentenced and more like a place where I could make decisions. That is the secret no one tells you about reclaiming your life. It rarely arrives as a trumpet. It shows up as a clean counter, a set alarm, a plan written in your own hand. As evening settled, I lit the lavender candle and set James's photograph beside it on the table. I told him about the list. I told him about the walking group flyer and the timer labeled lock. I told him that tomorrow at 8:15, the story would bend in a direction our son could not control. I told him that I would not touch blame tonight because blame is a drug that dulls the edge of necessary action. I blew out the candle and washed the dish the wax had spotted. I turned off the lights in the den, then the kitchen, then the hallway. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and held the silence in both hands. I did not pray for courage. I thanked the part of me that had kept some for emergencies. I lay down and closed my eyes. Sleep came quickly, not as surrender but as consent. Tomorrow would come regardless. I had given it a name. Plan, Right before I drifted under, a final thought rose like a small lantern in a dark field. If they want a trip without me, I will give them exactly what they asked for. And I will take back what they never offered. Sleep held me through the night for the first time in days. When I woke, the air felt sharper, as if the house itself knew what was waiting for me. I brewed coffee instead of tea, something stronger, something that reminded me of mornings when James used to sit across from me with the newspaper folded under his hand. The steam curled up and touched my face, and I took it in like breath before a dive. The timer on my phone was already set. 8:15. That was when their flight would be loading, when they would believe everything had been neatly paid for by the mother they thought of only as a bank. I watched the minutes tick toward the hour with a strange calm. Not dread, not excitement, just certainty. Before the timer could sound, I opened the laptop again and scrolled to the lock icon. I let the cursor hover, the blue outline glowing like a waiting flame. One click would change the story, but the power wasn't in the click itself. The power was in knowing it was mine to choose. I didn't press it, not yet. Instead, I turned to the list I had printed and left folded in my recipe book. I smoothed it open on the desk. The names looked different in morning light. Stronger: Claire, Margaret, Nora, Evelyn, Anita, Ruth. 6 women who lived their lives in the shadows of other people's needs. I traced each name with my finger, whispering them as though speaking them could call them closer. I imagined their faces under Hawaiian sun, laughter loosening lines that years of worry had carved deep. I saw them standing barefoot in sand, holding one another's stories with respect instead of dismissal. I saw myself there too, not as a sponsor or a servant, but as a companion. For the first time in so long, I let myself picture a trip where I wasn't invisible. The thought steadied me in a way nothing else had. The phone buzzed. Another message from David. Boarding passes printed. Kids are so excited. Thank you again, Mom. We'll call you from the beach. No invitation, no apology, just another dismissal wrapped in casual words. I set the phone aside. I breathed. The kettle clicked off again, though I hadn't realized I'd filled it. I poured hot water into a second mug, set it beside the first as if I were making coffee for James. His photo was still on the mantel, the smile frozen, timeless. I whispered toward it. You always said I was stronger than I thought. The words caught in my throat, but they steadied there. The alarm chimed softly. 8:15, the time I had written. The cursor still hovered over the lock. I lifted my hand, then let it fall back to my lap. Not today, not this morning, not yet. I wanted them to sweat first, to stand in the airport lines believing they were untouchable. I wanted the lesson to arrive like a tide, sudden and undeniable, pulling their comfort out from under them. I closed the laptop and rose from the chair. The silence in the house felt different now. It didn't press against me the way it had before. It held me, it waited with me. The plan was alive. I stepped to the window, looking out at the yard, the bird bath glinting in the sun. A breeze stirred the wind chimes James had hung decades ago, their faint song rising and falling. I let the sound fill me. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't desperate. I had time. I had choice. The suitcase was still by the door, but I no longer looked at it with shame. It was no longer a monument to rejection. It was a reminder of what I was capable of carrying and what I was capable of leaving behind. I whispered into the room, softly but steady. They asked for a trip without me. Tomorrow, they will have exactly what they wanted. And for the first time since that message arrived, I smiled. Not a bitter smile. A knowing one. The kind of smile that comes when you remember your story has more chapters left than anyone else expected. The morning of their departure arrived with a sky so clear it almost looked staged. I woke before the sun fully rose, not because I needed to, but because my body carried a hum of energy it hadn't known in years. I moved through the house with deliberate steps, steady and quiet. The suitcase was still by the door, but I no longer felt its weight as an accusation. It was simply there, like a reminder that I had choices. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the kitchen table. I set my phone down beside me, screen faced up this time. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wanted to see every word they sent, wanted to witness each ripple of confusion when their perfect plan began to fray. I knew the timing by heart. Their flight was scheduled for 10:45. Check-in began 2 hours earlier. That meant the unraveling would start just after 8 when they approached the counter, smiling and smug in their matching hats. I opened the laptop. The lock icon still glowed in the corner, waiting for me like a secret only I knew. My finger hovered over it once more. This time there was no tremble, just a click. A soft sound, almost anticlimactic. A small confirmation box appeared, freeze mode activated, all linked cards disabled. And that was it. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the house embracing me like an accomplice. Outside, the world moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. A car drove past, a dog barked in the distance, a bird landed on the windowsill and tilted its head at me. But in another part of the city, at the airport, my family was about to discover the quiet power of absence. The first message came at 8:22. "Hey Mom, getting a weird error at check-in. Can you check the travel account real quick?" I didn't answer. I took another sip of coffee. 8:29. "They're saying the card was declined. Can you see anything on your end?" Maybe the bank flagged it? I set the phone back down. The steam rose from the mug, curling like a ribbon in the air. At 8:34, the calls began. One then another. I let them ring. The sound filled the kitchen and then faded into silence each time, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the steady beat of my own heart. By 8:45, the voicemails were frantic. David's voice was low, hurried. "Mom, please call me back. Something's wrong with the cards. The kids are getting anxious. Just tell me if there's an issue so we can fix it." Fix it, as though I had broken it, as though I were a malfunctioning machine instead of the one who had built the whole trip piece by piece. I rose and walked to the living room. James's photo still smiled from the mantel. I carried it back with me and placed it on the table beside the coffee mug. "You'd like this," I told him. "You'd like watching them sweat a little." Another voicemail came in. Sophia this time. Her voice was sharp, thinly veiled panic wrapped in forced cheer. "Hi Marilyn, it's probably just a small glitch, but could you take a look? We really need this to process right now. Everyone's waiting." Everyone but me. I set the phone face down again. The kitchen filled with light as the sun climbed higher, golden rays spilling across the counters. I felt warmth on my skin, not from the sun, but from the certainty that I had chosen this moment. At 9, another message arrived. "They can't release the rental either. It's saying funds unavailable. Did you do something?" I almost laughed. Did I do something? After 3 years of sacrifice, of saving pennies in jars, of late nights tutoring strangers while my eyes blurred, they finally asked if I had done something. Yes, I had. I had stopped pretending my love was a bottomless well they could drink from without ever giving back. I carried the phone with me into the backyard and sat on the porch. The air smelled fresh, alive with the scent of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. I listened to the wind move through the trees. My phone buzzed again and again, a desperate rhythm that no longer pierced me. I let it vibrate against the wooden arm of the chair until it went still. At 9:30, a new message appeared. This one was shorter, stripped of the casual tone. "Mom, I don't know what you did, but we need you to unlock it. Please, not sorry, not I was wrong, not we hurt you. Just unlock it." I placed the phone in my lap and folded my hands over it. I closed my eyes and breathed. The sun touched my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Inside, the lavender candle waited on the counter. I lit it and placed James's photo beside the flame. The wax began to melt slowly, pooling at the base, steady and cert. The room filled with the scent he had always loved. The phone buzzed once more. I didn't turn it over this time. I let it vibrate until it stopped, swallowed by silence. They were at the airport now, circling in confusion, their smiles fading, their voices sharp with panic. And I was here in my home, finally choosing myself. The story was no longer theirs to write. The phone did not stop buzzing. It rattled against the table like a trapped insect, short pauses between frantic bursts. I picked it up once, not to answer, but to glance at the list of missed calls. David's name filled the screen over and over, stacked like bricks in a wall he was trying to climb. Sophia's number was there too, along with one I didn't recognize but guessed belonged to her parents. I imagined them huddled together in a line at the terminal, voices rising, other travelers glancing over in irritation. I poured another cup of coffee. This one I carried to the window, watching the neighborhood unfold as though it were any ordinary morning. Children rode bicycles down the sidewalk. A woman jogged past with her dog tugging at the leash. None of them knew that across the city, my family was unraveling at an airport counter because of one decision I had finally allowed myself to make. Another voicemail came in. I let it play on speaker as I rinsed the mug from earlier. David's voice was strained, clipped. "Mom, listen, they're saying the villa reservation is invalid now. The kids are upset. Sophia's parents are furious. Just tell me what's happening. We can fix it, okay? We can fix it." The word fix again. As though I had broken the world they built, instead of realizing it was never mine to stand in. At 10, the agency emailed me directly. "Dear Ms. Barker, we've received notice of a freeze on the linked account. Please confirm if you wish to proceed with cancellation of the villa booking." The language was polite, professional, but the confirmation at the bottom made me smile. As the sole account holder, you have complete authority to pause or cancel all reservations. Authority. A word I had not felt connected to me in a long time. I clicked confirm. A new window appeared. Cancellation processed. Refund initiated. We look forward to assisting you again in the future. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. Outside, the wind chimes sang a thin, sweet note. The phone buzzed again. This time the voicemail carried a different tone. Sophia. Her cheerfulness was gone. Her voice cracked with anger barely concealed. Marilyn, this is ridiculous. We're standing here with 2 children and no way to get on this plane. I don't know what you think you're proving, but this isn't fair to them. You need to fix this right now. Fair. That word made me laugh, low and bitter. Where had fairness been when they wrote me out with a single text? Where was fairness when they wore matching sweaters and left me in blue? Where was fairness when they decided I had done enough by paying and should now simply vanish? I sat at the table, the candle flickering beside me, and let her words dissolve into silence. By 10:30, the calls slowed. The battery on their phones must have been wearing thin, their patience stretched beyond repair. The last message came just before their flight should have boarded. David again, his voice low, almost pleading. Mom, if this is because of the text, we can talk, all right? Just unlock the account and we'll work it out when we get back. When we get back. As if they would still go. As if the only part of the plan that mattered was the vacation, not the fracture beneath it. I set the phone down, face up this time, and didn't move until the screen dimmed. At 11, my inbox pinged with a new message. Refund confirmation, airline taxes and fees returned to account holder. Another followed minutes later. Rental cancellation confirmed. Refund initiated. And then another. One by one, the trip I had built collapsed into numbers flowing back into my account. The house felt lighter with each notification. By noon, the phone had gone silent. No more calls, no more messages, just quiet. I stepped outside into the yard, the sun warm on my face and breathed deeply. The lavender scent from the candle clung to my clothes. The air was fresh, the sky wide and endless. Somewhere my family sat in an airport terminal, angry and embarrassed, wondering how everything had fallen apart. They would tell themselves it was a mistake, a glitch, maybe even an act of cruelty. But I knew the truth. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. They had asked for a family trip without me, and I had given them exactly that. I walked back inside, placed James's photo at the center of the table, and whispered, I think you'd be proud of me today. The photo smiled back, unchanged, but I felt something in my chest shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one who had chosen, and that made all the difference. The house felt like it had exhaled. After days of heavy silence pressing on me, now the quiet was softer, looser, like a blanket instead of a cage. Notifications had stopped arriving. My phone lay still on the counter, its screen dark, its battery no longer burning itself out with demands. The refunds had begun to trickle in. Small digital chimes each time a vendor released funds back to my account. The airline taxes first, then the deposit on the villa, then the excursions. Each one arrived like proof that I hadn't imagined my authority, that my name still meant something even if my family pretended otherwise. Every ding of the banking app was a reminder. I was not powerless. I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar things with new eyes. The floral dish towel I had used so often it had faded pale pink. The old rocker chair in the corner where I used to sit with David when he was a child, his head heavy on my shoulder after he'd fallen asleep. The bookshelf stacked with recipes, half of them never tried, waiting for occasions that never came. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was surrounded by reminders of what I had lost. I felt like I was standing in a museum of all the ways I had given. And I wondered, what would happen if I gave differently? I sat at the desk again and pulled out the sheet of paper I had tucked inside the recipe book. My list. The names of women who had lived lives parallel to mine, women who knew invisibility intimately. I smoothed it flat and read them aloud. Claire, Margaret, Nora, Evelyn, Anita, Ruth, each syllable carried weight. I added more names. Denise, who had cared for her mother until the end and then returned to an empty apartment. Marjorie, who never married, who always sent birthday cards to neighbors' children but never received one herself. Lydia, who once confessed to me in a hushed tone at Bible study that she feared no one would remember her when she was gone. My pen scratched steadily until the page was full. A small army of women, overlooked, underestimated, enduring. I sat back and stared at the list. A thought rose in me, gentle but insistent. Maybe the trip wasn't lost. Maybe it had only been waiting for the right people. I imagined the villa again. I saw not the smug smiles of Sophia's family, but the astonished faces of these women as they walked into a home by the sea. I imagined their laughter filling the air, not loud for performance but deep, unpracticed, raw. I imagined us sitting at a long table, no one excluded, no one corrected or dismissed. The thought made my chest ache in a way that felt like hope. The phone buzzed again, a final attempt perhaps, but I didn't look. I carried the list into the kitchen and pinned it to the bulletin board where I used to hang school schedules and grocery coupons. A new kind of calendar had begun. I brewed another pot of tea and carried the mug to the back porch. The afternoon light shimmered over the yard, warm and forgiving. A neighbor waved as she walked past with her dog. I waved back, smiling for reasons she couldn't know. Later, as the sky turned orange, I opened the laptop once more and pulled up the agency's site. The refunded balance had settled faster than I expected. The numbers glowed steady. I clicked through options for villas, not the one I had chosen before, but others. I studied floor plans, counted bedrooms, looked at photos of porches that overlooked waves. I called the agency. A cheerful voice answered. "This is Natalie. How can I help you today?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'd like to discuss a new booking, not for the previous party, for myself and some guests." Her tone brightened. "Of course. How many in your group?" I looked at the list pinned to the wall, at the names lined like a poem. 7, I said. 7 women. There was a pause, a small surprise in her voice. "Wonderful. Do you have a destination in mind?" "Yes," I said softly. "Hawaii." As she began to search, I closed my eyes and saw it again. Not a dream built on sacrifice for people who erased me, but a new story, one where I wasn't begging to be included. One where I was the host, the center, the builder of something real. For the first time since James died, the future felt wide open. I spent the evening turning names into voices in my head. Each one carried a memory, a moment that had stayed with me long after the world forgot them. Claire, who once brought me soup when I was sick, her hands shaking as she set the bowl on the table, whispering that she wished someone would do the same for her. Margaret, who slipped $50 into the church collection plate every week even though she lived on a fixed income, never letting anyone know. Nora, who laughed at her own loneliness as though it were a punchline. Evelyn, who taught me how to prune roses, her garden blooming while her life shrank inside her quiet house. Anita, whose knees had grown stiff but who still walked her neighbor's dog out of kindness. Ruth, who once told me that after her husband died, the hardest part was that no one said her name out loud anymore. I picked up the phone. For the first time in days, I wasn't afraid of what it might hold. I wasn't waiting for David or Sophia. I was thinking of the women whose silence had always been deeper than mine. I dialed Claire first. Her voice was warm but cautious, as though she didn't expect calls anymore. We exchanged pleasantries, the kind you use to test if someone truly means to stay on the line. Then I asked the question without preamble. "Claire, would you want to see the ocean again?" There was silence, then a small intake of breath like a child catching sight of fireworks. "Oh, Vanessa," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I never would." I smiled into the receiver. "What if I told you we could?" She laughed, nervous and disbelieving, but the spark was there. Next, I called Margaret. She answered on the second ring, her voice firm as always. "Vanessa, everything all right?" "Yes," I said, and for once it was true. "Better than all right, I have an idea." She listened as I explained, her silence stretching long. At last she said, "You mean it, you're serious." "I'm very serious." A long sigh followed, a sound of release. "Then count me in." One by one, I made the calls. Nora cried softly. Evelyn whispered, "At my age, really." Anita laughed until she coughed, then said she'd need help packing. Ruth simply said, "Thank you for remembering me." By the end, my heart felt swollen, too big for my chest. These women had lived in shadows for so long that the thought of light startled them, and I was the one holding the lantern. When I hung up the last call, I sat back in my chair and stared at the list pinned to the board. Each name now had a voice attached, a note of joy, disbelief, or quiet acceptance. What had begun as scribbled ink was now a living plan. I returned to the laptop. The agency had emailed me options. Villas with wide porches, villas with ocean views, villas where the air seemed to shimmer with possibility. I selected one with a long dining table on the patio, imagining it filled with women's voices, the sound of laughter cutting through the night like a hymn. When the confirmation email arrived, my eyes blurred with tears. Not the tears of shame I had swallowed days ago. Tears of relief. Of defiance, of beginning. I closed the laptop and walked to the suitcase by the door. For the first time since packing it, I unzipped it. The dresses waited inside, folded neatly. I lifted one out, held it against me, and turned to the mirror. It still fit, loose in places, but alive with color. I smoothed the fabric over my hips and whispered, "This is not wasted." I placed the dress back carefully, then reached for the lavender candle. I set it in the middle of the suitcase and smiled. This time, when it burned, it wouldn't be for what I had lost. It would be for what I had chosen. James's photo still stood on the mantel. I carried it to the table, kissed the corner of the frame, and whispered, "I wish you could see this." Then I corrected myself. "No, you do see this." I set him back on the mantel and lit the candle anyway, the flame steady and sure. The house filled with lavender, and for the first time in years, it didn't smell like longing. It smelled like promise. I sat by the light until the wax pooled. My phone rested beside me, no longer a weapon of dismissal, but a tool for gathering. A gateway not to rejection, but to possibility. When I blew the candle out, the smoke curled upward, twisting into the air like a prayer. I whispered into the darkness, "This time, it's my family I'm choosing." And I went to bed with a heart that felt lighter, ready for morning. Morning sunlight filled the house with a warmth that felt like invitation instead of intrusion. For once, I woke without dread. My hands did not reach for the phone expecting rejection. They reached for it with purpose. I dialed Claire again, my voice steady. "Pack light," I told her. "You won't need much more than a swimsuit and a pair of sandals." She laughed nervously, like a child testing the ground before a leap. "Are you sure, Vanessa? I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," I said. "You're a guest." The word guest rolled off my tongue with a new kind of sweetness. For years, I had been treated as the support beam holding everyone else's comfort, never as someone worthy of being invited, celebrated, welcomed. Now, I was the one extending the invitation, and it felt like stitching a new cloth out of threads that had been waiting in the dark. By midday, my phone was alive with messages, but not the desperate tones of David or Sophia. This time, it was excitement. Margaret texting me photos of her sun hat, Evelyn sending a string of questions about whether she needed to buy sunscreen, Anita promising to bake cookies for the flight even though she joked airport security might confiscate them. Ruth's message came last. It was just one sentence. "I can't believe someone remembered me." I pressed my hand to my chest as I read it. That was the entire point. To remember the forgotten. To choose the unchosen. The agency confirmed the booking had been processed. Our flights were arranged. The villa was secured. I clicked through the images again, the long porch overlooking the waves, the dining table with chairs enough for us all, the bedrooms washed in soft white light. I could almost hear the voices that would fill it. By late afternoon, I drove into town with the list of names tucked in my bag. I went to the department store, buying swimsuits in every size I thought they might need, bright scarves, floppy hats, travel pillows. I filled the cart not with obligation but with joy. For the first time, my money was not a leash others had tied around me. It was a gift I was choosing to give. The cashier raised her eyebrows as she scanned the pile. "Looks like you're headed somewhere fun." "Yes," I said. "Somewhere beautiful." Back at home, I packed the items into gift bags, tying them with ribbons I had salvaged from the souvenirs meant for my grandchildren. It felt like repurposing grief into celebration, like turning ashes into color. Each bag had a name on it now, not Olivia, Ethan, Grace, but Claire, Margaret, Nora, Evelyn, Anita, Ruth. The handwriting was the same, but this time the names would not be discarded. That evening, as the sun slipped low, I sat at the table with James's photo and lit the lavender candle once more. The flame flickered, steady, alive. "Do you see it?" I whispered to him. "I'm not begging anymore, I'm building." The house seemed to answer with its stillness, as though even the walls approved. The phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting perhaps one last attempt from David. Instead, it was Claire again. She had sent a photo of her old suitcase, patched and worn. "It's been waiting in the closet for 20 years, she wrote. "I think it's ready." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. The forgotten women were not just coming with me. They were bringing pieces of their lives that had been sealed away for decades, ready to be carried into light again. I went to bed that night not with dread but with anticipation. My suitcase was still by the door, but it no longer mocked me. It waited like a companion. Tomorrow, it would roll across new floors, into a space filled not with dismissal but with chosen joy. And as I drifted toward sleep, I thought of the irony. My family had asked for a trip without me. And they had gotten exactly what they wanted. But so had I. The airport looked different when I arrived, not as a place of exclusion but as a gateway. The last time I had thought of this terminal, it had been in my imagination, filled with Sophia's crisp commands and David's distracted nods, children tugging at their sleeves while I stood off to the side, more purse than person. But now I walked in with my head upright, my hands steady on the handle of my suitcase. And I wasn't alone. Claire stood near the entrance, her patched suitcase by her side, her hair brushed back with care she hadn't given herself in years. Margaret was beside her, sharp-eyed, efficient, wearing a sun hat as if it were armor. Nora waved when she saw me, laughing with a brightness I had never heard in her voice before. Evelyn shuffled forward, leaning on her cane but grinning wide. Anita clutched a tin of cookies wrapped in foil, as though determined to test airport security. And Ruth, dear Ruth, had tears streaming down her face before we had even checked our bags. "You really meant it," she whispered, clutching my hand. "You really remembered us." I squeezed her fingers. "Of course I did." We moved together through the lines, our small procession drawing curious glances. Perhaps some saw a group of widows, elderly women chasing a last adventure. But that was the surface. Beneath it, we were an army of the overlooked, carrying our own stories onto a plane the world had never expected us to board. Security was a blur of laughter and clumsy juggling of bags. Anita's cookies were inspected, much to her irritation, and then allowed through. Evelyn joked that if she beeped at the metal detector, they'd have to pry her wedding ring off her finger, and she wasn't about to give that up. Margaret argued with an agent about her knitting needles until he waved her through in defeat. At the gate, we sat together, 6 women and me, our voices rising and falling in a harmony of rediscovery. Claire told stories of her children when they were small, her eyes alight with memory. Nora confessed she hadn't been on a plane since her 20s, and Evelyn promised to hold her hand during takeoff. Anita passed cookies around, insisting they were fresher than anything we'd be served in the air. Ruth simply sat with her hand on mine, silent, her tears replaced by a smile that seemed too big for her face. When the boarding announcement came, my heart raced, not with dread but with joy. We rose together, each of us holding not just tickets but proof that forgotten people could choose themselves, proof that erasure was not permanent. The plane lifted into the sky, and with it, so did we. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but over it, I heard the sound of laughter, of relief, of something like freedom. Nora gripped Evelyn's hand and squealed at the tilt. Claire pressed her forehead to the window. Margaret organized everyone's seatbelts. Anita passed cookies down the row, and Ruth rested her head on my shoulder as though she had been waiting her entire life for a moment like this. Hours later, the island appeared beneath us, a sweep of green and gold surrounded by water so blue it seemed unreal. The women gasped in unison, a chorus of awe that made my eyes sting. The plane descended, the wheels hit the runway, and the cabin erupted in cheers, not from the other passengers but from us. When we stepped into the Hawaiian air, leis were placed around our necks by smiling attendants. The scent of plumeria wrapped around me like an embrace. For the first time in years, I did not feel invisible. I felt radiant, alive, part of something I had chosen. At the villa, the surprise deepened. The porch overlooked the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore as though applauding our arrival. The dining table stretched long, ready for feasts. Bedrooms weighted with crisp linens and wide windows open to the sea breeze. We gathered on the porch that first evening, the sky painted in oranges and pinks, the ocean whispering below. I placed James's photo in the center of the table and lit the lavender candle. The flame flickered, caught, and burned steady. "This was supposed to be for them," I said softly, my eyes sweeping across the faces of the women who had joined me. "But maybe it was always meant for us." Claire reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "It's perfect," she whispered. The women bowed their heads, some in prayer, some in quiet gratitude, some in disbelief that they were really here. And in that moment, the twist unfolded fully. Not just that I had stopped their trip, not just that I had reclaimed the money, but that I had transformed what was meant to erase me into a celebration of women like me. A new family, a chosen family. We raised our glasses, filled with the sweet local juice Anita had insisted we buy. We clinked them together, the sound sharp and clear. "To us," Margaret said firmly. "To us," we echoed, voices rising into the night. The candle glowed, the ocean roared, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I felt completely free. The ocean became our clock. Each morning began with the sound of waves rolling against the shore, steady as breath. Each evening ended with the horizon melting into fire and then into velvet black, stars scattered like promises across the sky. Time loosened its grip, and for the first time in years, I lived not by calendars or duties but by light, by laughter, by tide. The women bloomed here. I watched it happen slowly, like watching flowers uncurl after rain. Claire walked the beach barefoot, her patched suitcase forgotten in the corner of the villa, her hair flying loose. She said it had been decades since her toes touched sand. Margaret swam in the pool every morning with the precision of a soldier, her strokes sharp, her face fierce, but afterward she laughed like a girl. Nora tried pineapple for the first time and laughed so hard juice spilled down her chin. Evelyn sat on the porch and painted the ocean in clumsy but beautiful strokes, her cane resting nearby. Anita baked cookies in a villa kitchen that smelled of sugar and butter, waving the spatula like a wand. Ruth simply sat close to me, quiet, her hand often finding mine as though to remind herself that we were still here, still real. In the evenings, we told stories. Not the polished ones you share at holidays to entertain, but the raw ones, the griefs, the betrayals, the ways we had been written out of our own families. Each voice joined the next until the air felt heavy with truth. And then, slowly, the heaviness shifted into something else. Relief. We were no longer alone in our invisibility. I lit the lavender candle each night. It burned on the table beside James's photo, the flame steady against the island breeze. One night, as the wax dripped down the glass, Claire asked, "Was this for him?" I nodded. "Yes, at first. And now," I smiled, "now it's for us." They raised their glasses to that, a toast I never expected to hear in my lifetime. But freedom rarely arrives without echoes from the past. One morning, as the women were gathered on the porch sipping coffee, my phone buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in me wanted to hear what desperation sounded like when spoken instead of written. I stepped away, walking down the path toward the beach, the phone cool in my hand. I answered without speaking. His voice rushed in, sharp with exhaustion. "Mom, where are you? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked out at the waves. "Yes," I said quietly. He exhaled hard. "We had to drive back from the airport. The kids were devastated. Sophia's parents are furious. Do you know how embarrassing that was for us?" For us, the words stung, but not the way they once had. I let them hang in the air like sea spray, burning off quickly. "You left me out," I said simply. There was silence on the other end, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, "It wasn't personal." I laughed softly, bitter but free. "It was entirely personal. You just didn't care to notice. Mom, we can work this out. Just send the money back, we'll plan another trip." The absurdity of it made me laugh louder. The waves crashed, echoing my release. "No, David, there won't be another trip, not like that, not ever again." "Then what did you do with it?" His voice cracked, part anger, part fear. I glanced back at the villa where laughter drifted from the porch. "I used it," I said, "for something better." He sputtered, searching for words. "You can't just—" "I already did." And I ended the call. I stood on the sand for a long moment, the phone heavy in my pocket, the ocean wide before me. I felt James beside me, not as a ghost, but as memory carried in my bones. He would have smiled. He would have told me this was strength, not cruelty. He would have reminded me that love does not mean surrender. When I walked back to the villa, the women were waiting, their eyes curious but not prying. I sat with them, and Ruth slipped her hand into mine again. No one asked what the call had been about. No one demanded answers. They simply kept talking, their voices blending with the sea. That was the difference. Here, I was not a function, I was a person. That night, as the candle burned low, I whispered to James's photo, "I think I'm finally free." The flame danced in agreement. The days on the island passed like waves, each one similar but never the same, each one carrying me further away from who I had been. We filled the villa with color and sound. In the mornings, we walked the beach together, our footprints trailing behind us until the tide erased them, proof that starting over was always possible. In the afternoons, we cooked meals, clumsy at times but full of laughter. In the evenings, we sat around the long table, the lavender candle burning as if it had always belonged there. I began to notice small transformations. Claire stopped apologizing before speaking. Margaret, who had always kept her shoulders tight, leaned back in her chair and laughed freely. Nora sang under her breath when she thought no one was listening, until one evening she sang loud enough for all of us, her voice cracked but brave. Evelyn painted every day, her canvases growing bolder with each stroke. Anita, who had always baked for others, finally let us bake for her. And Ruth, sweet Ruth, looked in the mirror one morning and whispered to me, "I feel alive again." Their joy was my proof. The money had not been wasted. It had been redeemed, but David did not stop trying. Emails came first. Long, rambling paragraphs about disappointment and betrayal, about what the children had lost, about how Sophia's parents thought I was unstable. He used words like selfish and vindictive. He reminded me of how much he had depended on me after James's death, as though that debt gave him permanent claim to my life. I read them once, twice, then deleted them all. I did not reply. Then came the video call requests. I declined each one. The last came late at night when the villa was quiet and the ocean sang outside the windows. My finger hovered over the screen, but I refused. I set the phone face down and returned to the table where Ruth sat beside me, holding her cup of tea. "You don't have to answer," she said softly. "I know," I told her. "For once, I know." The silence that followed was not heavy, it was peace. One evening near the end of the trip, we decided to hold our own ceremony by the shore. We carried lanterns made of paper, each one with a name or a memory written on the side. As the sun dipped low, we lit them and placed them gently into the water. The lanterns floated away, bobbing against the current, carrying our grief, our regrets, our invisibility out to sea. I wrote James's name on mine with a note beneath it. "Thank you for believing I was stronger than I knew." I set it in the waves and watched it drift, the flame glowing until it blurred into the horizon. When I turned back, the women were standing together, tears glistening on their cheeks, faces illuminated by the soft light of the lanterns. Claire took my hand. "This is what family feels like," she whispered. "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "This is family." On the final night, we sat around the table one last time. The candle burned low, nearly gone, but the flame refused to die. We raised our glasses again, a simple toast. "To choosing," Margaret said. "To choosing," we echoed. I looked around the table and felt something I hadn't known in years, belonging. Not earned by sacrifice, not bought with silence, but given freely. The next morning, as we packed our bags, my phone buzzed once more. Another message from David. I didn't even open it. I placed the phone deep in my suitcase, zipped it closed, and smiled. Because this was my ending and also my beginning. The villa, the laughter, the candle, the women, all of it had become a declaration. I was no longer the woman waiting by the door for permission to join. I was the one walking forward, choosing who stood beside me. And as the plane lifted from the island, carrying us back toward the lives we had paused, I pressed my forehead to the window. The ocean shimmered below, endless and free. So was I.